what we're doing to the joints. And then we'll talk about how to get the joints tension, and then your partners will all feel that tension so they can say, yeah, I'm at tension, and then we'll be able to tweak it, and you'll really get a fine sense of that. All of these steps are important steps while you're learning how to do this. When you know how to do it, you just find that feeling of tension. Just go there. You don't have to do all these steps. But it's really important. A lot of people in other classes, especially NMT5, especially if they've had other teachers and they've learned it from other providers and stuff, very often they're like, they don't teach all those steps. I like those steps. Because they don't teach it because it's hard to remember back when we were learning. We had to do everything like one, then the second move, then the third move. Eventually we just get there and we're like, oh, yeah, there it is. Oh, that's better tension, boom, done. But how do we teach that? Then it becomes magical, and then you leave gurus. So let's understand what we're doing to the spine first. We're going to be setting the patient up in a side posture position like that. The upper body is going to be rotating like this. The lower body is going to be rotating like that. I positioned this joint like this to illustrate what this manipulation would do. And what would this manipulation do if I were to do this motion in the spine like this?
Left rotation.
Which rotation?
Left.
Which rotation?
Oh, wait. Right. Just kidding.
So this would be right rotation at that joint. Not right rotation of a bone. That's what's happening at this space in between these facets. Now, of course, this is disarticulated right now because it's hard to see that minuscule little motion. So I dislocated these joints to show you what's going on. So if I'm telling you I'm going to push on a mammillary process, which mammillary process do you think I'm going to be pushing on? One of the mammillary processes on the upper vertebrae or the lower vertebrae? Lower. So in this side posture setup, when we're doing counter torque, and that's what's going on here, this vertebrae is moving in one direction, the other one's moving in the other. So we're counter torquing the two vertebrae in that motion segment to generate tension at that joint. When we have counter torque in the setup, we're always going to be contacting the lower vertebrae of the motion segment. Does that make sense to everybody? Everybody with me there? And so what restriction would we need to find to set it up like that and fix it? What does that produce? What motion? Right rotation. What restriction should we need? Right rotation restriction. In a right rotation restriction, we have to right rotate the spine. That's English. If we have a motion that's restricted, we do that motion, or we want to at least increase that motion. It wouldn't be the other way around, because that wouldn't make any sense. That would be not the definition of restricted. So it's restricted from doing this. We want to do that in the adjustment. And obviously this is just a gigantic mess right here, because I just disarticulated this. Actually that's T12, so I don't want to confuse everybody. There we go. So I need a right rotation restriction to set a patient up like this. Right rotation restriction means what about the spine? Yes, it doesn't want to rotate to the right. What else does it mean? Nothing. You're thinking about position. So, I could have a spine. Let's fix this a little bit. Put a curve in there because I'm a chiropractor. Might need to do an x-ray or 3. I could have a spine that's perfectly symmetrical, but it's just not rotating to the right. That would still be a right rotation restriction. So a right rotation restriction doesn't mean it's stuck to the left. It could, but it doesn't always. What would we call a restriction like that? Not a restriction. What would we call this?
Malposition.
What kind of malposition? Yeah, right. This is a horrible malposition. Let's pretend it's not this bad. Yeah, right. This is a paraplegic.
Oh.
Left rotation malposition. How do we fix a left rotation malposition?
Left rotation.
Doing left rotation.
No, don't overthink this. This is super easy. Here, fix it. Somebody fix it.
It's not going to the left.
Fix
Where's-
it.
Wait,
Put
wait,
it back
wait,
to,
okay, okay,
fix
okay.
it.
This
Oh, you just
Oh,
made it
wait.
worse. You
Oh,
killed
this
that
way, this
patient.
way, sorry. This
Oh,
There
that
we
way.
go.
But you just
And
had
what
to
did
go
we do?
over a bone.
Right.
Was that
Yeah,
right?
so left rotation malposition, what would we do to fix it?
Right.
Yeah, we rotate that vertebrae to the right. So we can fix malpositions and restrictions the same, but it doesn't, one does not equal the other. Because what if you find that patients going through active range of motion, they don't rotate to the left very well. You do motion palpation, it's not rotating to the left very well, but you palpate the SPs, they're directly in line. If you're thinking that all restrictions are malpositions, then that doesn't make sense. And you will find that. There will be motion restrictions without any aberration in the SPs. If there's no aberration, what do you do? Well, what a lot of people do is they make stuff up. They say, oh yeah, that SP is that way, and they adjust it. So it's one of those, we might as well just not make stuff up. If you do find an SP that's off to one side or the other, test it. See if it doesn't move very well. If it makes sense, let's say the SP is off to the right a bit. That means maybe we have a left rotation malposition. Let's do some motion palpation. If it doesn't rotate to the left, there we go. If it doesn't rotate to the right, that would make sense. We have a left rotation malposition that's not rotating to the right. So in that case, the left rotation malposition and the right rotation restriction existed together. I would argue that if you have what you think is a malposition, but it moves just fine, that's not a malposition. It doesn't make any sense. We don't have to push that bone back in place because the bone's not out of place. Because if it were out of place, we would notice a functional issue. It wouldn't necessarily move properly. And we'd be able to detect that, or at least we could think we detect it. So,
So you're saying if we have a malposition, we don't necessarily need to adjust it, it's just that if we have a restriction.
yeah, so I would say if you think you have a malposition, test it. The only place that I'm not urging you to do that is the pelvis, because we didn't really tell you how to test that. There are ways, but it doesn't matter. We actually will do functional tests when we do the forward bend test. So that's kind of the same way, except we're not pushing it. We're not doing motion palpation. We're doing a functional test, see if it's stuck. If it's like this and everything's moving fine, I don't know what to do with that. I can't honestly tell you we need to put those bones back in place and fix their symmetry. Because if they work and everything's moving, then I don't know that that's necessarily the best way to go about doing it. So, when we're thinking about a right rotation restriction and fixing it this way, I really want you to think about the restriction. If we're thinking malposition, this is really where everything gets kind of messy. If we think, well, the bone's out of place, just put the bone back in place. I would never, I hate that description. Hate it with a passion. My L4's out of place, or I need my rib put back in place, or my SI joint's out. Because that implies a very positional problem. And I find that the function is a lot more important than the position, because we're not always symmetrical. But some people like to look at the spine as things being out of place and bones being out of place. And if they are, put it back in place. It's super simple. It's a lot harder to think about restrictions than it is bone out of place. Because if a bone's out of place, what are you going to find? A bone out of place. You just push it back. The SP's over here, just push it back that way. That paradigm, that train of thought, it really is kind of easy. It just makes things symmetrical again. SP's over here, I'll push it that way. If that doesn't work, I push on the TP this way to try to bring that SP over. You're just pounding down the high spots. It's really easy. So, in that case, and this is really why I'm going over this, in this particular setup, where I'm bringing the lower body that way, upper body that way, we call this right rotation. But if we're just thinking about a bone in space, which way are we rotating this, or which way are we turning this bone?
To the left.
To the left. So if you're thinking a bone in space with no relationship to the bone above or bone below, then you would set this up differently. And that's the way that a lot of people that do manipulative medicine have set it up. They thought, we have a left rotation restriction, I'm going to set the patient up like this and push that bone into left rotation. But because we have counter torque, it's always going to be like this. There's no way to rotate a joint to the left when the upper body's going one way, the lower body's going the other. unless that torsion's not happening at the joint. We're getting a little deep into this rabbit hole. Does everybody kind of get that though?
Kind of.
Everybody do this. Turn your lower body one way, upper body the other. Let's everybody turn our upper body to the right, lower body to the left. Feel some tension in there. Where are you feeling tension?
In the
My
back.
entire spine's in tension right now.
Yeah.
Lower back. So
Lower back.
if we have tension at a joint, which motion is that tension created in? Which direction? If our upper body's going to the right and our lower body's going to the left, that's right rotation. That tension is being built in right rotation. There's no way to build tension in left rotation this way. We would have to do this. Correct?
That's why the context is always superior. You always take it from the superior.
You always, yeah,
Okay.
when you're thinking about the motion, it's
Yeah,
always what the
superior.
superior vertebrae is doing.
Okay.
And that's why in this setup, we have to be contacting the lower vertebrae. Because the lower vertebrae is connected to the lower body. Whatever the lower body's doing, the lower vertebrae has to do. Whatever the upper body's doing, the upper vertebrae have to do.
But why did you say you want to rotate this left? That seems like
It wouldn't, well,
the wrong way.
this
You
is
said
right-
from the perspective of this. Yeah.
This is right rotation, right?
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
And when I'm doing right rotation of that joint,
Yeah.
this bone is relatively rotating to the right, but this bone's relatively rotating to the left. So if I do that to this bone,
Yeah. That's.
if I do that to this bone,
Yeah.
it's still right rotation at the joint.
Okay, because of the superior frame of reference.
Because of that joint.
Because of this joint,
Yeah.
because that's the only thing that could be happening. We couldn't call this left rotation of this joint because that joint is being twisted to the right.
All right. So you never talk of you can't because you can't just talk about this particular bone right here.
Right.
Because then you're doomed.
That's the problem.
All right.
And that's what a lot of people do. So we're in
Yeah.
this weird transition period.
Yeah.
This idea is very commonplace at Western States and a couple other chiropractic schools, but when we talk to other chiropractors and other students, their heads explode. They're like, you guys are crazy. But biomechanics, so this another profession has studied this, studied the joint tension, what happens, and said, wait a second, this is what's going on at the joint, and that totally makes sense, right? We kind of have to know both, unfortunately. It's like knowing two different languages now. Even here. In this class, we're calling this right rotation setup. Other providers are going to be like, no, you're nuts. Right rotate, you got to push the bone that way. That doesn't happen in the body. If we just try to push a bone in space without concerning itself with its relationship to the other bones, what would happen? The entire spine would move. Because that's the way our spine works. It works together. So we have to actually screw up the relationship between two vertebrae to actually do an adjustment. And that's what we're doing by uncoupling motion, creating torsion, and doing all these other things that we have to do.
But they're saying that always comes from